Today, we're looking at Psalms 96, a worship psalm. Sing unto the Lord a new song. Sing unto the Lord, all ye earth. Sing unto the Lord, bless his name. Show forth his salvation from day to day. Declare his glory among the heathen, his wonder among all peoples. The whole thing just seems to move. It's just a pure worship. For all the gods of the nations are idols, but the Lord made the heavens. So honor and majesty are before him. And we go on to worship the Lord in the beauty of holiness, saying to the heathen that the Lord reigneth. And before the Lord, for he cometh to judge the earth. Again, the excitement of the coming of Messiah, the excitement of the coming of Yahweh to judge. There are people who are afraid that Yahweh will judge, but this psalmist is excited. And we need to have that excitement. We do need these remembrances and perspectives to remind us to pull our minds away from the world and sometimes just get into worship. So this is a nice psalm, again about worship. Read through it, glean it, look at the grid on it. Let the heavens rejoice and let the earth be glad. I mean, there's a lot of positive words. Many times when we're reading poetry, we're giving our minds words that we don't normally get. You know, we go off to work or we go off to some struggle or whatever, and we don't think of the words like glad and beauty, holiness, righteous, justice. We don't think of those words, and here we are. So do one of these a day for the rest of your life, and you'll always be thinking about those things. At least sometimes. It's like planting seeds in a garden. It will come up. So read this worship psalm and take from it, feel the power of the psalmist as he's worshiping God. When we're going back to the book of Judges, and now Solomon, getting all these guys confused. Joshua has died, and now the judges happen, because the judges are coming up to rule in this nation. They're coming up to rule. They're supposed to be ruling for God, but we see this problem of disobedience almost immediately. And it's something that God had foreseen. He'd prophesied. He didn't make it happen. He just saw it in the hearts of the people. Again, he doesn't make things happen, but he sees in our hearts what we're going to choose. And so here we have his disobedience in their disobedience in chapter 2. Chapter 3, he starts talking about the nations. And he starts talking about these judges. And he left those nations. See, God is changing the plan a little bit at a time. First, wipe out the nations, get rid of sin, grow a righteous nation. Well, they're not working with me on that. Okay, now we'll leave the nations to prove them that they're sinners, have them come back to me. The problem is they keep bouncing like a ball. You know, up to sin, then down to hurting and calling out to God. He sends a judge, then they go up to sin again, then back down. We see this. And so God starts talking about this. And he goes, only the generations of the children of Israel, that they might know to teach them war, for at least such as before knew nothing about it. See, these people didn't know how to fight for what they believed. And unfortunately, you can either fight or you can have faith. God will move for you or he's going to be against you. And so he left these lords, these Philistines, these Canaanites, to prove them. And he wasn't proving God to the people. He's proving the people to themselves. Look, you're sinners. Look, this is happening because you're sinning against God. That he has left people groups that he could have wiped out, that he wanted to wipe out for the sake of his name, for the sake of righteousness, for the sake of his goodness. And so he left those people to be a snare so that you might know that you are sinning against God. And so it didn't take them long. They took the daughters, the wives for the sons, and they gave their daughters, creating these leagues and these alliances through marriage. And the people did evil. They worshiped Balaam. Again, Balaam is an Ashtoreth, sex god, baby murder god. It doesn't matter which one is which. Usually they're a little bit of both. You can't have hypersexuality without abortion. It's just how that works. He sent, and the anger of the Lord was hot against Israel. Notice it wasn't hot against the nations around them. Now, he does hold these nations accountable for how they treat Israel. Many times, if God is spanking Israel, if he's chastising Israel, if he's even punishing Israel for its sins, The other nations need not take joy in that. It's like if one person's getting a spanking, the other kids don't need to rejoice and jump in. That's exactly how God does in the future when we see him dealing with Nebuchadnezzar and with Babylon. Babylon rejoiced over what God was doing to Israel, and that was wrong. They paid for that. But here we see that his anger is hot, and he sells them into the hands of the king of Mesopotamia. And the people cry out to God, and they sent in a deliverer named Othniel. And Othniel delivers them, and ruled there 40 years, standing in for God, standing in for the rightness of God, for the standards of God. And then he died. And it's interesting, Othniel is actually kin to Caleb. We see that Othniel was Caleb's younger brother, just to give you some perspective. The children of Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord again, and he sold them into the Ammonites and unto the Moabites. We remember on the east side you had the Ammonites and the Moabites that God had left because of the children of Lot and the children of Esau. And the people cried out against the Lord. He sent this guy named Ehud. And Ehud is a kind of a funny story. Ehud goes to the king of Moab, and he has a long sword in his side, in his tunic, that can't be seen. And he goes to the king, and he says, I've got a special present for you. So he goes into the king, and the king gets closely and got rid of all the guards. And he gets up close, and he takes this sword and stabs it into the king. And of course, the king was so fat that it swallowed up the entire sword, and dirt started coming out. So you get the idea of how big this man was and how fat he was. He had dirt. He was so grotesque inside that all of its fat had turned into dirt. And Ehud left, and as he did, he passed through the guards. The guards wanted to know where the king was, and says, well, he's in there, but give him some time. He's relieving himself. He's going to the bathroom. So the guards wait, and they wait, and they wait. And then they go in and find out the king is dead, and Ehud got away. But it's interesting how we see, it's kind of a humorous story here, but it's also the fact that God judges, that he sends his judge. But he gives us these, he's going to give some deeper snapshots as we get to going here. So Ehud went and blew a trumpet in Mount Ephraim, and the children of Israel came down and slew the Moabites. They moved in there, moved across the Jordan, or forded it, or used ferries or whatever. They went across and fought with them, and they slew 10,000 men, all lusty and men of valor. So they didn't kill the weaklings. These guys, the Moabites, at the time, were known to be these lion-faced, lion's manes. They kind of had that fear thing going. They were big and burly. These were men who knew how to fight, and they wanted to get through intimidation and fear is how they did a lot of their warfare. But they were subdued by Israel, and the land was again at peace for 80 years. So we get an idea of time moving here. So it's been about 120 years now, and we're moving forward. We see the next one was Shamgar. He slew 600 men with an ox goad. The idea of taking something that you would, it's a big goad, a gourd that you would use for drinking water. It's a big, heavy gourd, and he slew 600 men with this gourd. So he kills them. But the children in chapter 4 did evil in the sight of the Lord. And the Lord sold them to Jabin, the king of Canaan, who reigned in Hazor. And the children of Israel cried unto Yahweh, because the king had 900 men, and he had chariots of iron, and for 20 years, so we're looking at almost 200 years now from the time of Joshua. So we're dealing with that. It should be, what are we looking at here? 40 plus 80 plus 20, so 40, 80, 20. So we're not 200 years, it's more like 80 years. But still, you get an idea of time passing. So here they have, for 20 years, they were oppressed with Hazor, because he had all these chariots, and they were scared of the chariots. And again, going up against iron chariots, who wouldn't be? There is a woman named Deborah mentioned here, and she's a prophetess, and she judged Israel at that time. Now you get the idea that the high priest and the Levites, or the people of Aaron, were not judging the nation from the tabernacle. So here they had a prophetess, a woman who was off by herself, leading because the men were not standing up to lead. So she calls Barak, the son of Abinadab, and says, hath not the Lord of Israel commanded, saying, go to Mount Tabor and take 10,000 men with thee of Naphtali and Jerusalem, and fight with Sisera, the king of Jabin's army. So the idea that we need to fight. I'm calling you to go fight. But Barak didn't want to go, and he says he wouldn't go unless she went. And she goes, okay, I'll go, but the honor for the battle will go to a woman. She says here, we're going to, she says, I will surely go with you, notwithstanding the journey that thou takest shall not be for thine honor. For the Lord shall sell Sisera into the hand of a woman. Now, she's not talking about herself here. It's interesting. We'll see how this story goes on. So Barak takes and calls Jerusalem and Naphtali, and they go down to Kadesh. And there's a fellow there named Eber. Eber is a Kenite. And the Kenites, again, they were kin to Moses, because Moses' father-in-law, Jethro, was a Kenite. So this person, Eber, who was a Kenite, moved away and was living in a tent near Kadesh. And when the army came, when Sisera came, he pointed out where the army was. Here, go down here. Israel's over here if you want to fight with them. So what happens is, Sisera goes down with his 900 chariots, and he gets beaten back, just like Deborah said God had wanted it to happen. And Deborah said unto Barak, go up, for this day the Lord hath delivered Sisera into thine hand. Is not the Lord gone out before thee? So Barak went up to Mount Tabor and fought with Sisera. And he beats Sisera. They beat the 900 chariots. And Sisera lights off his chariots and starts running for his life. He goes back to the tent of Eber, thinking that this was a place of safety. It's a place of peace. And Eber's wife is there. Her name is Jael. And she invites him in. She gives him some milk to drink. She lays him down. And then she goes and says, you sleep, and I'll tell you if anybody comes along. Then while he's asleep, she takes a tent peg, and a hammer, and runs it through his temple into the ground. Then Eber's wife told Eber, and they went and told Barak, and came, and Jael showed them what she had done. So God gave the glory for the death of Sisera to the woman Jael. And so we see this here, is that God subdued that day Jabin, the king of Canaan, before the children of Israel, and the land of the children of Israel prospered and prevailed over the king of Canaan, for they had destroyed Jabin, the king of Canaan. Now again, this story sounds very violent, something out of an R-rated movie. God will stand for his holiness, for his justice, and he will have them take life of his enemy. Now again, I say this several times, and I'll repeat it, we who are in Christ are the ambassadors of Christ. We are not to take up arms. When we take up arms, except in self-defense or in national security, we are wrong to take up arms to fight people for Christianity or fight people for the cause of Christ. We'll let Christ take care of that. We are to be ambassadors. Now, I believe in the future, when God comes back and leads the armies of Israel against the nations, he will be more like Jehovah. He will be Jehovah, actually, and he will come back. And of course, blood will be spilt. He talks about that in the future. But right now, our job is not to take swords for Christ. Our job is to only protect on national and only protect on personal. But here we have this woman killing this man. It might be a very horrendous sort of way. We've also seen that God killed the firstborn, that they wiped nations out, even down to the children. With Korah rebellion, they took the family and burned them and stoned them. And it's like, well, I thought God loved people. Yes, but people aren't loving him, and he will turn against them. He is a fearsome God. One thing we don't teach in Christianity, that God is a God to be feared. This is why you need to come into Christ, because he is a fearsome God, and he will not take pity. If we don't take pity on his son for what his son did, he will not take pity on us. He says in many places here, I will rejoice over doing bad for you, as I rejoiced over doing good for you. I will rejoice going against you, as I rejoiced going for you. So we have to see this about God. He's not just some lovey-dovey, put a kid on my shoulder, or put a kid on my knee kind of God. He is a God of justice and righteousness, and he will kill his enemies. That's what hell is about, casting out the enemies of God. Chapter 5 is a song, and we talked about songs before. The idea, if you remember, the song of Moses and the song of Miriam. And this is the song of Deborah, talking about praise the Lord for avenging Israel when the people willingly offered themselves. When you willingly offer yourself to God, things start moving forward. He talks about this. He talks about the mountains melted before the Lord, even as Sinai, using a lot of figurativism that we see in poetry. He talks about the days of Shamgar. We just talked about that with the ox goad. She gives a little bit about herself, and that they chose new gods. Then there was war at the gates. War at the gate came when they chose new gods. That's something America might need to learn, that when you choose new gods, war comes to the gate. Was there a shield or spear seen in the 40,000 of Israel? They didn't even have self-defense. And so she goes and judges, and she talks about this. Awake, awake, Deborah, awake, utter a song, arise, Barak, and lead the captivity captive. Lead the captivity captive. The idea that God has called them to stir up, to take back. He talks about them coming out of Ephraim, talks about the princes of Issachar. He even talks about some people, even talks about how Zerubbabel and Naphtali jeopardized their lives for the cause of God here. Talks about them fighting in Megiddo. And so she's giving this chronicling of what God has done for Israel, and they needed a song. They needed a song to tell them what God was doing in this generation. He says, cursed be ye Menzor, said the angel of the Lord, cursed bitterly the inhabitants thereof, because they came not to the help of the Lord, or to the help of the Lord against the mighty. There was a group of people who held back, who did not want to go into battle for the Lord, and the Lord noticed that and cursed them bitterly. So the idea that when God calls, we need to move. He needs to be seen as this God of power and might and fear, not just love. Blessed be the woman. She praises Jael and gives her glory for what happens with Sisera, and that he bowed down his knees and he fell down to sleep, and that she took and killed him. And even gives a little poetic understanding that the mother of Sisera would look out of her window, and she's kind of, being figurative here, being imaginary, making an imaginary idea, that the mother would look out and say, why is this chariot taking so long? Why is he taking so long? As she's wondering where he's going. And of course, she has wise ladies around her saying, well, he's still divvying up the spoil. He's still out there taking what he's supposed to take. But he's never coming back. He's never coming back. So let all thine enemies perish, O Lord, and let them that love thee be as the sun, when he goeth forth in his might, and the land rested 40 years. So again, we see another generation of peace. You can either have generations of peace, or you can have generations of conquest. There seems to be no middle ground. And the difference between peace in Israel and conquest over Israel is what they're doing with the Lord. The Lord is for them. They are strong. Their enemies stay away. When the Lord is against them, he moves their energy. He moves their enemies over them. God is not neutral. There's no neutral part. Either he's for you or against you. We live in a place of grace right now, just like the wheat and the tares coming up, where it looks like God doesn't care. That he doesn't care that the evil comes up and that good gets pushed down. He does care. We have to look at our future, look at our current life based upon the God of the Old Testament, not just some syrupy, happy-go-lucky, sing-songy love God that we've created only by looking at the New Testament, and only by looking at the New Testament a certain way. God is not mocked. You will sow what you reap. One day he will come back and judge for sin. And he does love, and he's willing to freely forgive through Christ. But we have to realize that without that, he will cast out. There's no greased pole to hell, and God doesn't want you to go. No, he will do the casting into hell. This is something you need to be afraid of. He will cast into hell. And I'm very thankful that he's told me about his son, that I might choose of my free will whether I'm going to have my sins forgiven now, or whether I'm going to pay for them forever. As he cast me out, he will either draw me in or he will cast me out. There's no greased pole. God will do the casting out. He is to be feared, but he's also to be respected, honored, and loved. Thank you.